Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite TV show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to listen to find out. This is your host, Samantha Parrish.
Hello there, and welcome back to the show. As always, my name is Samantha Parrish, and I am your lean, mean, movie talking machine, your screen queen. So here we go. This is the birthday month. I've been waiting for this for quite some time. I am approaching 29 years old on the 26th. But honestly, I'm not too bummed about going into my last year into my 20s. I'm in a good place in my life where I can finally produce the material that I have always wanted to do, and I'm glad that I can provide a show that I get to be not just the movie podcast, but a movie podcast. And recently I've gotten some news from my friends that have really enjoyed the episodes and what I have to say, and it makes me feel good. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be back with the birthday series. So, starting out with the birthday series is a movie of mine that I have to say, when I depart the earth, I want this movie buried with me. I would have to say that of all of the favorite movies I have in my life, The People versus Larry Flynt would be in the top five. I don't know where in the top five, but it means that much to me. I have shown this film to my friends, and a lot of them have said, I can see why this is your favorite movie. It is such a severely underrated film that still thrives today. It's still talked about here and there, but it's only talked about in certain subjects. This is a film that covers a lot of ground about freedom of speech. And oh boy, did Larry Flynt test the freedom of speech for a long time. If there is one thing that I love in this world, it's a biography film. I have been obsessed with biography films since I was a teenager. And it kind of perturbed my mother a little bit about why I love to see true story films, because there's so much to take in from it, to see someone's life put up on the big screen. But that also begs the question, how much of it is true? The research that I've done about this film is fascinating, with how I still have my love for the film, but I also can't ignore what really happened behind the scenes and the real facts to Larry Flynt's life. So, let's get into one of the most famous Supreme Court cases. This is The People versus Larry Flynt. I've waited so long to say that. So you might be thinking, what is The People versus Larry Flynt? Who is Larry Flynt? Well, Larry Flynt was the creator of Hustler magazine. He became an overnight millionaire, and he was married to one of the girls that was a part of his go-go bar in Cincinnati, Ohio. However, there was a price to pay. Larry Flynt was arrested for his magazine, and after he got arrested, he started to test how much the First Amendment was on his side. And he didn't stop testing it for years and years and years and years and years. The man lived a life where he was unashamed by his actions, but he could also back up his actions. He knew what he was getting into, and despite not having a big education, he knew exactly what to say. There's a part in the film that I love where he's in court and he's being reprimanded for the magazine, and he said, well, if you don't like it, don't read it. This country belongs to you as much as it belongs to me. This was really testing the waters of obscenity back then, about how much you could show. Think about this. Look at where we are today with obscenity. There are many things that we don't decree to be obscene anymore, but back then it was. It took a long time until we were comfortable with having obscene things and knowing that we had the choice to look at it or look away from it. Looking at the 35-year span in this film, it hits hard knowing how far we've come, because I grew up in the generation that still made others my age feel bad about their choices, and now we're getting into a point where we can agree to disagree, or we can learn to see the other side. But back then, there was just one side. It was very one sided. We still have some one sided things today, but it's not as severe as it was, to the point that you had the guy from Hustler magazine having to make a point about it. He was one of the rarest people in courtroom history that did whatever he wanted. Not many people can get away with that. And I wouldn't really say entirely he got away with it, but he was unashamed to go into this. He at least thought it through, knowing what was going to happen, because he kept throwing money. And he's like, you keep arresting me, I'm going to state my case, I'm going to bail myself out, and I'm going to prove my point. That's what he did. He was one of the few people in our history that challenged the system in a very unique way, unlike any other people that ever challenged the system. There's a lot that I'm going to be getting into his life, but I'm just going to name the basics as to what he went through. He got arrested for a magazine that no one had to read, and it was just free to view to the public. Then he got shot. And then he became addicted to drugs to cope with what happened with losing the use of his legs. And then he got an operation, and he ended up having a permanent speech impediment due to what they had to do for the operation on his brain to get the pain to go away. And then he got arrested again, of course. And then came the Supreme Court case. And you can look this up, that there is the Supreme Court case of Falwell versus Flynt. And that's what's covered in this film. However, with a whole 2-hour span of his life, the 35 years, there's some stuff that had to be changed. And this is the fact versus the fiction. So as much as I love this movie and still want it buried with me when I die, I can't ignore the fact that this is not a 100% biographical film. A lot of the key elements of this film has been changed around, like with many biography films. But it's like, I can't unsee what I read, knowing the fact that every time I watch this film, I have to remember about what happened in real life. So the first thing I'm going to start out with is Larry Flynt's assassination attempt. In the film, he and his attorney, Alan Isaacman, are leaving the courtroom and they are shot by a mysterious gunman. And at that point, they still did not know who shot Larry Flynt and Alan Isaacman. Except here's the thing. Alan Isaacman was not shot. Alan Isaacman was his lawyer, but not at that time. It was another lawyer that was with Larry Flynt, and they weren't leaving a courtroom. They were in a driveway, and that's when they got shot. But, they had to put it somewhere in the film, so they chose to do it that way. Another part of this film that also was given a heavy creative liberty was his wife, Althea Flynt. Now, for the most part, Althea Flynt is played perfectly by Courtney Love. It almost physically hurts how much I had to take back a majority of the things that I said about Courtney Love, as is the most of my friends that were also shocked to see Courtney Love in this film. She fucking killed it. And she, of course, had to work with the fact that her character was not entirely 100% accurate. So, for the most part, Althea Flynt is the wife of Larry Flynt. But she was wife number 4 out of the 5. She also had 2 kids with Larry Flynt. In the film, when Larry Flynt is shot, he says, "I can't have a child with my wife. I had to think about the fact that that would be a hell of a thing to have to show. Althea Flynt was a heavy drug user. She did not have a very long life. I hate to spoil it for you, but that's what happened in real life. That would have been a very damning thing for the film. It would have been accurate, but it would have been pretty hard to have to know that she willingly did drugs despite having children. And this is also kind of true to real life, considering Courtney Love was also a heavy drug user when she was pregnant with her daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, and even after Frances Bean was born, she still was a heavy drug user. I still don't know what the reason was for not having the kids written in the film, if it was just for the sake of the plot. With the fact that this film spans from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the kids would have been like in their 20s or late teens when it came out in 1996. So, either Milos Formen, the director, opted to just go ahead and keep the kids out of the script, or the kids themselves asked, can you keep us out of the script? It's not the first time that it happened with some people asking, hey, can you write me out of the story or keep me as a cliff note because I don't want the involvement here. It's happened before. Another part of the film that's inaccurate is Larry Flynt's family. There's some parts in the film where Larry Flynt's mother and father show up. They show up at Althea Flynt's funeral, and they also show up for the Supreme Court case. Unfortunately, Larry Flynt's mom and dad passed away way before Althea Flynt passed away. I don't know why they were sprinkled into random parts of the film. I guess, again, creative liberties. Another part of the fact versus fiction is the $64,000 question, who shot Larry Flynt? At the end of the film, there's a line that says that they never caught the assailant. Well, some time went by and they did. Larry Flynt's assailant was a spree killer that had killed a couple of people before he shot Larry Flynt. And I forget the name of the killer that went on the spree, but it was never revealed why all of a sudden he just decided to try and assassinate the owner of Hustler magazine. So there is one more part for this section on fact versus fiction, and honestly, I don't know how to talk about this section, so please bear with me. When I was doing my research on Larry Flynt, I did find there is an accusation of sexual assault that was brought on by his own daughter. Now, Larry Flynt, of course, has denied this, but unfortunately there was not a further investigation. They just remained estranged. Knowing that, it changed the way that I saw the film. I have to keep in mind to remember that the man that has said things that I stand by is also a man that possibly did something terrible to his own child. And again, I say possibly because there was no further investigation, so I'm trying to stay within a mutual range that's not going to ignore the dismissal of the claim, but then also making sure that I don't feed this film too much so I can still keep in mind of this one part that was made towards Larry Flynt. In the day and age we live in now, there's no way to ignore a claim because unfortunately women went unheard in their claims. I truly hope that she has peace in her life, and I hope everything is okay in her life. Like I said, it's something I have to keep in mind every time I watch this film, that there are parts I love about it, there's parts I praise about it, as you already heard what I love about this film, but this is also a film where its message is that you have the power to believe what you want to believe, and there are parts of the film I believe in, but I don't entirely believe in Larry Flynt because of this accusation. I believe that I can love what he says, but I don't have to love him. I would have to say that Larry Flynt's contributions to the film did make this a little bit more personal. Larry Flynt gave his iconic vagina necklace to Woody Harrelson to use in the film. There's also another part of the film that has his contribution, and that's Larry Flynt himself. In one of the scenes where Larry Flynt is going to trial for Hustler magazine and the whole obscenity charges, the judge there is played by the Larry Flynt. When I found out that Larry Flynt played the judge, I was like, wow. Because I love it when they do that. I love it when they get someone to play a part in the movie about themselves and found out where they were in the film and what part they played. It is superly ironic that he played the judge that slammed the gavel and gave Larry Flynt 20 years. But there's also some parts in the film where I feel like Larry Flynt was a little bit too happy on seeing this part of his life recreated. And now, don't quote me on this, but during the part where Larry Flynt is on the stand and the judge is looking at him, and Larry Flynt, the real Larry Flynt, I should say, has his glasses like in his mouth just looking at Woody Harrelson, and every time I see that scene I just like to think that he's sitting there going, man, I look beautiful. It's like, Larry, that's Woody. I look beautiful. I don't know. I don't know. Because, I mean, they did a good job making Woody Harrelson look like Larry Flynt. Like, too good of a job. But then there's some irony. He wasn't invited to the premiere of his own film. How about that shit? Like, and I kind of wonder how that conversation went when they had to tell him, yeah, you're not coming to the world premiere. And he's like, oh, why? Like, well, Larry, we know you. You caused scenes for so many years at courtrooms. What makes you think we're not gonna just let you come the red carpet and think you're not gonna do something? The loophole was Woody Harrelson, who played Larry Flynt. Woody Harrelson invited him as his plus one. And I like to imagine what happened that day when Larry Flynt rolled up on the red carpet, being pushed by Woody Harrelson. And I love to think that Larry Flynt is going by with his middle finger up in the air. But it wasn't just Larry that put a lot on the line for this film. Woody Harrelson, Edward Norton, and the director himself, Milos Formen, put their payroll up to financially back Courtney Love being in the film. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Courtney Love killed it in this film. She left no crumbs. But she could not stop getting in trouble. And I'm sure a majority of my listeners are familiar with what she's done. Her name has popped up a lot with what she went through. It's like slowed up now, so I think she's finally calmed down. But she used to throw like banana peels at certain MTV or like music commentators. She would constantly get in trouble. The drug use was so bad. When I look at Courtney Love in this movie, I have to remember where she was in her life during this film. That she had to bury her husband, Kurt Cobain, and she had a baby between 93 and 94, then having a film on 96. Like, looking at the math, like, that's 2 years of having to pick yourself up back together, and she did make some very harmful decisions, but she was still able to get her shit together to do this film, and that's thanks to Milos Formen giving her an ultimatum to think about her career. And Edward Norton also had a part to play in that too, with being another soundboard to bounce off of Milos Formen to tell her, hey, you got something good going here, don't squelch it. And clearly she listened, otherwise she probably wouldn't have been in the film. But there was one time that Courtney Love got arrested for doing absolutely nothing. She was just walking. She was in one of the outfits that she wore for Althea, and she was mistaken for a hooker. Like, that was so bad that it happened to her. The one time she doesn't get in trouble, and she got in trouble for no reason, so they had to bail her out again, but at least it wasn't like she actually did something. So they had to be a little bit careful about her going out by herself in the outfits she wore for Althea Flynt. But there was one part to her performance that has still been given criticism, and that's her death scene. Now, this is a spoiler, but this did happen in real life, that Althea Flynt was diagnosed with AIDS and she passed away before the Supreme Court case happened. She drowned in the bathtub, and it was unclear if it was suicide or if she just slipped in the bathtub and she was so weak she couldn't get out. And in the scene, Larry Flynt rushes over to her as fast as he can in his wheelchair and tries to get help, and unfortunately it is too late. And that scene has been picked apart a lot. There's a section on IMDb called The Goofs. And for my own amusement and my interest, I wanted to see if there was any parts of the film that I obstructed with how much I love it. And I've always been a fair commentator that if someone points out a criticism, I'm not going to dismiss that. And I do see the goofs that was mentioned in the section. You can see bubbles coming out of her mouth and that her eyes twitching. And I went to go see it for myself because when I first saw that scene, I was heartbroken. The way that Althea and Larry Flynt's relationship is depicted, it's kind of up there with Morticia and Gomez. I know they're like a fucking mess, but they were there for each other. And that relationship is depicted perfectly in the film. So when Larry Flynt rushes over as fast as he can, I'm concentrating on Larry Flynt, heartbroken for the death of his wife, and hoping that maybe there is a chance. Maybe there is a chance to resuscitate her, but it isn't. Look at it from this perspective. If you were told you had to be in a bathtub filled with water and you couldn't breathe, that'd be a little difficult to maintain for a uncomfortable amount of time to be sure that there are no bubbles coming through. And unfortunately, your body's going to find a way to get some kind of air, so it was bound to happen that it was going to be not exactly as what people think it was going to be depicted. And of course, with her eyeball twitching, I feel like if I had my eyeballs yanked at, I think I would accidentally twitch too. I have to give the scene a break. As much as I can't deny that I do see the criticisms, and I see what people are talking about, I also am lost in the performance of Woody Harrelson crying over Althea Flynt. It wrecks my heart every time to see him red in the face from crying over the woman that has been with him for everything. His fourth wife that stayed during all the court cases, all the operations, everything going on. Helped to take care of him. And then the time came where she had to be taken care of. And he still did everything he could to take care of her. Like, it is a perfect recreation of their relationship. Everything else, like I said, it has its own inaccuracies. But the one thing that is accurate is their relationship. And I see it in that scene. Now, I don't have a proper segue for this. But I feel like I would never forgive myself if I did not talk about Edward Norton in this film. When we look at Edward Norton, he's one of the most prolific actors that we've had. He's almost been too hard to work with, but the man has an art for acting. Like, I have so much respect for Edward Norton and what he does. And I find it so ironic that this is the second film in his beginning stages as an actor. His first film he ever did was Primal Fear. And then the next film he would do would be The People vs. Larry Flynt, and both of these came out in 1996. And I find it ironic considering the first character he ever played, the first introduction was him playing a guy that was being defended by a lawyer, and now he plays a lawyer defending his client. Like, how will the tables turn? And out of all the films I've ever seen with Edward Norton, this one is still my favorite. This is prime Edward Norton. And he was so young back then. I think he was like 26, 27 years old when he got his debut into acting, and knowing that I'm officially older than him when he first started out acting, but how hard he had to work to get there. And it's clear he was destined to be an actor. But I also joke and called this the film where Larry Flynt gives his lawyer a heart attack because, my goodness, I love the expressions on his face every time Larry Flynt does something, and then the way he acts as Alan Isaacman, just being like, Larry, what the fuck are you doing? Like, I want someone to say my name the same way Edward Norton screams Larry. Like, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say my name with that much emotion. The role that Alan Isaacman plays in the film is a very important and integral part. I mean, this is the man that defended Larry Flynt for 15 years and then some, because at the end of the film it says that he still is Larry Flynt's attorney. But knowing the fact that Larry Flynt did not mind turning the whole world into a tabloid, that anything he said would be believed, or he would test how someone would believe any of his stories and how much he was wanted to be protected by the First Amendment. The man that protected him the most was Alan Isaacman, who got him out every single time. Alan Isaacman did everything in his power to protect Larry Flynt, to the point that he felt frustrated and felt humiliated often by Larry Flynt. If it was me and I was defending somebody that just kept getting in trouble and kept doing all these things, and I had to find efficient ways to protect my client, I'd be at wit's end. I would have dropped someone like Larry Flynt. There's no way me and my patients would be able to deal with someone like that. Alan Isaacman has this kind of patience that is on just another otherworldly level of what had to happen to protect Larry Flynt. If you've ever seen The People vs. Larry Flynt, or you've never seen The People vs. Larry Flynt, I highly encourage you to take a closer look at the microexpressions that Edward Norton does to play Alan Isaacman. Because as much as I know that there is some ways that these actors have to give their own spin on some of these people, I don't doubt that if he was given a cue of just look shocked, it's kind of hard to not be shocked by Larry Flynt. And it does kind of give you more of an in-depth to what Alan had to endure with the constant chaos that Larry Flynt brought in the courtroom. Larry Flynt was very unpredictable, which made things very difficult for Alan to be able to defend his client when anything that he says could be contradicted in seconds. One of the best examples I can give is a part in the film where Larry Flynt has to go back to court, and Larry Flynt has to state his name. All he has to do is say Larry Claxton Flynt, and instead he just goes, my name is Christopher Columbus, HB Pagey PPQ. And just seeing the look on Alan's face of like, really, Larry? All you had to do was say your fucking name. Another one of my favorite moments I want to talk about that I just can't help myself with is the segment in the film where Larry Flynt has a come to Jesus moment, and he is ready to go back to court, and even though Alan got him the deal of a lifetime because of the fact that Larry became a born-again Christian, and Larry Flynt just goes, well, you can tell the guy he can go fuck himself. Oh yeah, and praise the Lord. And Alan gets off the phone. He's like, okay, all right. And you see a look on his face of like, well, here we go again. So before I get into my final point, there's something about this film that I feel like is going to be a question that I'm never going to have answered, but I'm still going to ask it anyway. There's a part in the film where everyone is discussing what to do for the magazine, and they're brainstorming. And one of the ideas that they have is a reward for who can find JFK's killer. Now, I don't know how many of my listeners know this, but Woody Harrelson's father came forward to say that he was the hitman that killed JFK. Now, we all know that it's going to be a question that will not have an answer, just like my question that will never have an answer. But that has followed Woody Harrelson in a majority of his career. And I've seen this. A lot of the projects that Woody Harrelson has been a part of, there's always been some reference to the assassination of JFK. And of course, I don't know if it's just me putting too many pieces together, but Oliver Stone was the producer for The People vs. Larry Flynt, and he was the director of Natural Born Killers that also had Woody Harrelson in the lead role. And I know Oliver Stone is a nitpicker when it comes to historical stuff, so I don't know if he had a part to play in this by putting that question in there, because he has to constantly fucking do it in a majority of his projects. But the look on Woody Harrelson's face, I can never decipher it, if it's just annoyance or if it's just frustration, having to constantly have that part of his history being projected in his face, even in the plots of the films he's in. Like, that would annoy the hell out of me if someone had to constantly bring that up. And I know that he's had to deal with this, and damn, I don't know how he does it. He's got some thick skin to be able to be in an industry that doesn't mind bringing up dirty laundry, even if it's not yours. But Woody Harrelson's father isn't the only family relation in this film. There is a legit family relation in this film. The guy who plays Larry Flynt's brother Jimmy is none other than Woody Harrelson's real-life brother, Brett Harrelson. Now, Brett Harrelson is not as popular as Woody. Woody is definitely the breadwinner in the whole Harrelson family. But I love the fact that he got to play this movie with his brother. I think that is still so cool. Every time I see this film, there aren't too many sibling relationships that you get to see on the screen. And I know from what I read that Woody Harrelson did help with some parts of Brett Harrelson's short-lived film career, due to the fact that Brett Harrelson used to be a motorcycle enthusiast and used to drive everywhere and be in these shows. And after a couple of shows that went horribly wrong, he's like, maybe I should get back into acting with my brother. And then that's how we got him in The People vs. Larry Flynt. It is still one of the most popular roles he's ever played, and he's not really a big-time actor like his brother, like I said, but it's still a cool part of cinema history that I enjoy to look at every time, and he does a pretty good job in the film. And I think that's solely because of the way he plays off of Woody. They both bring out the best in each other, and you can see it. So I have one more random fun fact for you guys before I get into my final point, because I feel like I would never forgive myself if I didn't mention this, because I find it so fascinating. So one part of Larry Flynt's history is how he was a short-lived, born-again Christian, and he changed Hustler magazine to reflect a lot of Christian values. Like, it was a weird time having religion mixed with porn, but that's what he wanted. Larry did what Larry wanted to do. And that was due to the influence of Ruth Carter Stapleton, who is the sister of Jimmy Carter. And that really shocked the industry, where they're like, Larry Flynt and the president's sister? That's wild. And it shocked me to find out that the woman who plays Ruth Carter Stapleton is a woman named Donna Hanover. And you might not know that name, but you're going to know the name of the guy she was married to. Her former husband was Rudy Giuliani. She was the former First Lady of New York. So she already had prominence back then. I felt like that was the wildest piece of trivia I ever read in my life, considering how it became connected to a majority of the stuff that I heard in the news, with Rudy Giuliani being connected to former President Donald Trump. I'd never thought that I could relate to the news in such a way, but that was my way of kind of knowing what was going on with the news. Well, here is my final point, and I feel like this is very fitting to end this episode talking about Flynt versus Falwell. The whole reason why the movie was made. The history that had been made in Supreme Court that was hailed as God versus the devil, America's pastor versus America's pimp. Before I get into the biggest part of this film, I need to give a warning that I am going to go everywhere with this point. This is one of my favorite scenes of all time, and it's something that I live and die by. So now that you know that, now you know what you're in for. So here it is. So it comes down to this. Falwell versus Flynt. Now, the depiction of the famous Supreme Court case, it is the best scene in the entire film. And a majority of that speech lives in my head rent-free. I was going to include this earlier in my fact versus fiction segment, as I had read originally that the entire speech that Alan Isaacman says is word for word true. Now, it is true, but I did my research and I found the word for word documentation of Alan Isaacman talking with the other judges in the Supreme Court case, and it is long. And it kind of had me thinking, okay, I can see some of the similarities of some of the stuff I remembered from the film and then comparing it to the actual document, and it's condensed. There's no way a famous courtroom case that was in 3 minutes, there's no way that was just a 3 to 5 minute speech. I mean, people talk at that shit for hours. You watch the news. So I had to scroll through and find which one was parallel to the line that I wrote down in my notes earlier today. Because this is a long ass thing. I'm going to make a link in the description box that has the official document of the word for word speech from the actual court case, because I like to make sure that people know the real facts behind everything. So I'm just looking for that piece right now. Okay, so I found the part in this huge ass speech of the word for word line that I want to reiterate. So I'm going to start at the questions brought on by one of the justices. Why did they have him and his mother together? And Mr. Isaacman answers, they had him and his mother together to what's called a literary forum, a travesty, to put somebody in a ridiculous, unbelievable setting for purposes of effect. They put him in this situation knowing nobody would ever really perceive that that's what he's actually doing. But to say we're going to defecate this man who is so self-righteous in the area of sex and telling everybody else what to do, as well as telling them what to read. Another justice says, and what public purpose does that serve? And Mr. Isaacman answers, it serves the same public purpose in the sense of having Trudeau and Doonesbury call George Bush a wimp. What public purpose does that have? It makes people look at that and maybe think of George Bush as a little bit differently. And somebody who is out there telling other people how to live and being very serious and sober about it and acting as though he has more knowledge than they do about how they live their lives. Hustler has a right to make comments about it and make him look ridiculous as long as they don't state false statements of fact knowingly or recklessly. When I saw that scene, it gave me a big sense of relief. Looking at that line that I just said is something that gives me the greatest protection for someone who creates books that don't have everyone's go-to, that don't apply to everybody's likeness and genres. I myself have been asked to not write about certain things because of the way it looks like on the outside, but then there's a lack of wanting to know more about it, and that's called being assumptive. There is a a major problem with assumptions when it comes to obscene material without looking at it from all different sides and truly understanding it. And with what happened in the situation of Falwell versus Flynt, you do see how Falwell looked at the context and let his emotions get the best of him, uh, and kind of became the joke on himself. That he knows the truth, that there's no way that Hustler magazine would have made something true. They're Hustler magazine. They joke about sex. They're not the news. They're not out to besmirch his name. They were just making a joke, and they had the right to make that joke. So when I found that passage I just read, that was the closest to finding where that paralleled a part in the scene that I knew was the much larger version than the condensed version. When I saw Trudeau and I saw Bush, I'm like, oh, yep, I remember that part. I honestly would say it's better to watch the scene with Edward Norton than to read the entire script because it is lengthy. Every time I see that scene, I have to remind myself that the guy that made Hustler magazine pushed the First Amendment more than anyone else. Given the controversies I mentioned about him earlier, but the resolve is still the same. It still pushed the envelope a little bit more for today's society to be more accepting of obscene culture, knowing that they have the right to read it or not. But that Hustler magazine has the right to talk about certain things in their own way where they did not violate any laws, and they just made jokes about political figures and brought them down to our level. And that makes Americans feel comfortable. When we look at something like Saturday Night Live, Saturday Night Live became the pinnacle of doing everything in satire to make fun of hot topics in a way that make us feel better, like we know these people. It is able to make everybody on the same level playing field. And I have the greatest comfort from that scene being a creator of a story that has very obscene moments and it has a lack of morals and values. And I have this book smack dab in a place that is very conservative, where I've been told you can't talk about gay people, you can't talk about depression, you can't talk about people that swear. I did all of that stuff in my book with all of my characters that do things that would be considered obscene. Knowing the fact that Larry Flynt paved the way for someone like me to have a place in the world, that all of my stories are protected by the First Amendment, and that at the end of the day, it's up to that person to choose if they want to read it or not. If it's not their cup of tea, that's all there is to it. But I have my right to talk about the topics in my book, and this is the way I want to express myself, and I am protected by that. But we also live in a world that if we throw up these walls and we deprive ourselves to learn about something else, then we're just going to become ignorant and assumptive and arrogant and not make room to grow. Yeah, there are some things out there that aren't so great that we have to tolerate, but again, we have that choice. So, I'm going to put a stop on the social commentary right there because I feel like if I don't stop, I'm never going to stop. I'm going to end this section by talking about. So, I'm going to end this section with what happened after the film. After the verdict on Flynt versus Falwell, Larry Flynt and Jerry Falwell became friends. That's not how I thought their lives were going to be like afterwards. Larry Flynt and Jerry Falwell became speakers at seminars to talk about differences and the history of obscenity. These two went from fighting each other in the Supreme Court to shaking hands before seminars and having polite disagreements, that they could show people you can come from different worlds and find common ground. When Jerry Falwell passed away in 2007, Larry Flynt went on to say, one of my friends died today. That makes me very sad. So, for my final points about this film, I would like to read off the notes that I made earlier when I was rewatching the movie this morning. I said, if you get offended by everything, how do you expect to laugh? And I wrote something else here saying, and then there are people that are like, hey, there's a time and place to be offended, and this is not the time or place to be offended. And that can apply to many things, because we know our morals and values, and there are some people that obstruct what exactly is a moral and what is a value to things that might not need that. Because again, we control what has morals and has values, and we don't have to listen to things that are against our own morals and values without offending the other person. You have the choice to just walk away. So I'm going to end this episode to talk about one last fact. Near the end of the film, there is a line that Althea Flynt says, where she says, I am not going to be old and ugly, Larry. You're going to be old and ugly. There's even a part where she says, are you going to love me when I'm old and ugly? And the irony is that Althea Flynt would never be old and ugly, but Larry Flynt was. Larry Flynt lived until 2021. And then when I saw this film in 2022, it took me a minute to realize that I just learned the life of a man that had passed away in the previous year, and to know how this one line from 1996 ended up becoming true. The truth is wild, man, isn't it? Okay, so here's what's going to be on the next episode for the Screen Queen. I got a buttload of suggestions in my little container, so let's find out what the second episode of the birthday series is going to be on the Screen Queen. So here we go. Let me mix her up really good, shake it up, grab one. I don't need three, I just need the one. I'm convinced. I'm just convinced that everything is meant to be. I'm so... Man. So last year, I did an episode around the second installment for the birthday series that was an anime, and you would not believe what I'm holding in my hand. The next episode on the Screen Queen is going to be Sailor Moon. That just had to happen. I just have to stop fighting fate. And, you know, I stopped fighting fate a while ago, and I've just been embracing all the coincidences, the coincidences of my life. Like, it has me so shocked that I can't even grammar anymore. Wow. Well, that is going to be a fun episode, and I think it's been a while since we've covered an anime, so that'll be good. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for being here. If you want to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Screen. And I also post up some stuff on TikTok. I do some fashion videos. I do some movie videos, because of course I'm going to do movie videos. You can find me at the Mystical Space Witch. And if you're interested in the obscene book series that I wrote, you can find Inglorious Inc. in the description box. Alrighty, well, you all take care now and stay amazing. Remember, this country belongs to you as much as it belongs to me. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!